I used to work at a gas station on a rural highway in Ohio. It was a 24-hour place, and I usually worked the night shift from 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. My shift started busy with lots of people on road trips coming in for coffee, snacks, and gas. But by around 11 or 12, it got pretty quiet. At that point, I would play games on my phone, work on my online classes, or watch movies on my laptop. One night I was catching up on a TV show. The road was completely empty, with maybe one car passing by every 5 minutes and one coming into the lot every 20 to 30 minutes. Suddenly, the headlights of a car flashed through the window as it turned into the gas station and pulled up to one of the pumps. The car turned off, but no one got out. I went back to watching my show and a few minutes passed before I noticed the car was still there. No one had come in to pay for gas, and no one was outside filling up. The car was just sitting there next to the pump. It felt a bit sketchy, but I figured they might be texting, on a call, or counting money. Finally, I heard a car door shut. I paused my show, expecting the driver to come inside, but he just stood by his car, looking down. When I squinted, I realized he was actually looking at me. He eventually came over to the door and walked inside. The bell rang as he entered with his hood up, giving me a slight side glance. I saw one of his eyes briefly before he turned away and walked to the back section of the store by the snacks. I couldn't see or hear him from where I was. He was back there for a while, so I called out, "Do you need help, sir?" There was no response. Just as I was about to leave the counter, he came out from the corner and slowly walked back outside without looking at me. He went back to his car, opened the passenger side door, and seemed to be searching for something. Then he shut the door and looked at me again. Even with the distance and glass between us, I knew he was looking at me. He started waving me over. I didn't know what to do. Everything about the situation and this man was freaking me out. He started walking quickly toward the door, waving his arms and putting one hand in his pocket. It looked like he was reaching for something. I ran to the door to lock it. I managed to lock it just in time before he tried pulling it open. This was the first time I got a good look at his face. His hand was in his pocket, gripping what I was sure was the handle of a blade. I shut the blinds and told him we were closed. He didn't leave. He started knocking on the glass, then banging. I screamed that I would call the cops if he didn't go away. He stopped after a few moments and walked away, but I didn't check where he went. I stayed hidden behind the counter for 10 minutes before I opened the blinds. When I did, I felt a chill of horror. His car was still there. Where was he? Was he in his car or somewhere outside? Paranoid thoughts filled my head, like what if he was by the back door? I felt relieved when another car pulled into the parking lot. A normal-looking man came to the door. I unlocked it for him, and he walked in with two $20 bills in his hand. I told him to be careful of the other car, and we started a long conversation about what had happened. During our chat, the other car turned on and finally drove off. We laughed about it, but when the guy who worked after me came in at 4 a.m., I wasn't laughing. The whole drive home, I was shaking, thinking about what had happened. Nothing that strange ever happened again during the rest of my time at that gas station. In 2008, my second job ever was delivering Chinese food from a small corner restaurant. It turned out to be one of my best paying jobs because the place was always busy and I made good money from tips. It was a hectic Thursday night, just half an hour before closing time. We had 3 delivery guys working, including me. My boss, who was always a bit of a hard ass, told me to make a delivery and come back quickly. The address was in a town 5 miles away, so I knew it would be a longer trip. But longer trips usually meant better tips. I still remember the order: wonton soup and rice. It was a 15-minute drive to the house, which was in a not-so-nice part of town. When I got there, I stepped out of the car with the small brown bag of food. Before stepping up the curb, I looked up at the upstairs window of the house. I saw half of someone's face peeking at me, just their eyes and the top of their nose, as if they were trying to hide. It didn't look like a kid. It seemed like a grown man. I didn't know what to think, but continued walking to the door. There was a note on the door saying, "Doorbell broken. Asleep. Door unlocked. Money on table. Please come inside and leave food on table." The note was so weird that I had to take a picture of it. You know how they say red flags can go off in your head in a split second? That's exactly what I felt. I stepped back a few feet to look up at the window, again, but the person wasn't there anymore. If they were asleep, why leave a note like this? I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe it was a really socially awkward person who didn't want to interact with a delivery guy. I slowly turned the knob and yes, the door was unlocked. It was pitch dark inside. I couldn't see where the table was, where the money was supposedly left. I tried going left and found myself in what I assumed was the kitchen, because I could hear the fridge humming. Like I said, it was dark as hell in there. Finally, I thought of using my phone as a light. I turned the brightness all the way up, and that's when I saw the silhouette of a person in the corner of the kitchen. No features, nothing, just the outline of someone. At that moment, I dropped the bag of food on the floor and walked out the front door back to my car. I never looked back at that sketchy house or returned to that part of town. My boss was furious, even after I explained what happened, but that was just how he was. I did another delivery that night, but when I went home, I couldn't sleep. All night, I kept thinking about what could have happened if I had actually gone up to that table. "20 years ago, I worked at a gas station for about a year. It wasn't a job I enjoyed much, mainly because I often worked the overnight shift. The small convenience store attached to the gas station was open 24/7, and during my shifts, I was usually alone. We didn't get many customers at night, so there wasn't a need for more staff. The gas station was in a slightly rural area. Some cars would come in for gas, but not many people came inside the store. This made the job easy most of the time, but it could also be lonely and a bit creepy. Being alone in the middle of the night sometimes brought in sketchy characters, but I managed to do my job. That is until one night, an experience pushed me to my breaking point and made me quit. It happened on a Friday night during my overnight shift. It was around 11 p.m., and I hadn't had any customers in the store for a while. From behind the counter, I could see out to the 4 gas pumps. They were all empty, and even the road next to the gas station was quiet. Then, I saw headlights in the distance. Soon, a larger white SUV, which I later identified as a 1996 Chevy Suburban, pulled into the gas station. It drove around slowly, and then parked at one of the pumps. The way it was parked, it was facing directly away from me, so I could only see the back window. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was just another customer filling their tank. I sat behind the counter, waiting for the person to either get gas or come inside the store. But after a few minutes, no one had gotten out of the vehicle. This was unusual, as people typically started pumping gas or came inside almost immediately. The person in the SUV just stayed in the car. While I wasn't staring at them the whole time, I could see them clearly through the big window in the gas station. After about 30 minutes still, no one had gotten out of the car. This was really weird. Another car came, got gas, and left during this time, but the SUV remained. I got up to get a drink and returned to my spot behind the counter. When I did, I noticed someone in the back of the SUV. The rear window was tinted, but I could see a face close to the glass, staring at me. It was a man, and he had wide eyes fixed on me. I didn't know if he was the driver, but no one else had gotten out of the vehicle. I looked at him for about a minute and he stared back the entire time. I was creeped out and tried to distract myself with other things, but I couldn't stop glancing back at the SUV. Every time I did, the man was still there staring at me. This went on for almost an hour. I couldn't believe it. Eventually, I decided to go outside. Maybe I was just curious, or perhaps I thought I might figure out what was going on. I didn't plan to talk to the person, but I left the counter and walked to the door. The man was still staring at me from the back of the SUV, now about 50 feet away. I took a few steps into the parking lot, and then the man moved. He quickly ducked down and out of sight. I saw some movement inside the SUV but couldn't tell what it was. Looking back, I think he was crawling over the seats. About 10 seconds later, the SUV suddenly started moving. It reversed quickly, heading straight towards me. I had to move back quickly to avoid getting hit. The SUV continued in reverse, forcing me back up against the building. It screeched to a stop just feet away from me. I thought the driver was going to run me over or back into the building, but he stopped. Then the SUV sped off, tires screeching, and disappeared down the road. I was in shock. The guy had tried to run me over. I went back inside, hoping he wouldn't return. Luckily, he didn't. After that night, I put in my notice to quit. The whole experience was so bizarre and terrifying. I have no idea why the man stared at me for so long and then tried to run me over. That night at the gas station was the final straw for me, and I knew I couldn't keep working there after that. A few months ago, I started working as a police officer. Being new to the job, I was assigned to overnight shifts, working 3 12-hour shifts a week. It was tough, especially since the worst incidents often happened at night. I've only been on the job for 3 months, and already I have a story that feels like a nightmare. One night, while patrolling my route, it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. There were no cars on the road, and most of my route was dark because our town had a lot of forested areas. The only well-lit street was Warren Street, thanks to its streetlights. All the stores were closed at that hour, so there was very little going on. I turned onto Warren Street from a quieter road, driving slowly and keeping an eye on both sides of the road. As I passed a coffee shop parking lot, something caught my eye. I slammed on the brakes and reversed until I was back in front of the coffee shop. I rolled down my window and stuck my head out to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. The lights in the coffee shop were on, which was strange because the shop always closed at 6 p.m. on weekdays. I knew this because I was a regular customer and knew the owner well. Curious and a bit concerned, I pulled up to the curb and decided to check the door. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside, calling out the owner's name. The emptiness of the coffee shop at 3 in the morning made my voice echo, which was eerie. It gave me shivers, wondering why the lights were on and where the owner might be. I kept calling the owner's name until I heard a sound coming from the basement. I didn't even know the coffee shop had a basement until that night. I found the door leading downstairs to a dark abyss. I unholstered the flashlight on my belt and aimed it down the stairs. Deep down, I knew it was my job to investigate, even though I was scared. There wasn't a light switch, so I carefully made my way down the concrete stairs, unable to see much beyond the narrow beam of my flashlight. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a pitch-black basement. Then I heard the sound again, only this time much louder. It was a strange, half-electronic, half-organic noise that I couldn't quite describe. The sound came from the back room. I stepped into the back room, which appeared to be an office. I stood there, waiting for the sound to happen again. After about 30 seconds, the same terrible, distorted noise erupted from a corner of the room. It seemed to be coming from inside an air vent. I first tried shining my light into the vent, but the grill blocked the light. So I put my ear up to the vent to listen for anything inside. I heard something that sounded like breathing. My heart started racing. I angled the flashlight differently and pressed one eye up to the vent grill. The light beam hit the vent just right, and I saw a glove inches from my face. I unholstered my gun and shouted for the person to come out, but the vent door seemed screwed on tight. I could hear the person shimmying away through the vents until the sound disappeared. So many questions ran through my mind. Where did the vent lead? How did they get in there? And why were they in there? I called for backup and we did a thorough investigation. The owner came by around 4 in the morning to help us search. There were no signs of breaking and entering, no unscrewed vents, and no broken windows. The investigation lasted a few hours, but we eventually concluded that whoever was in the vents was gone. The thing that scares me the most is the sounds I heard that night. Not just the breathing, but the strange noise that echoed through the vents and could be heard all the way upstairs. Even now, I can't shake the memory of that night.